Hello and welcome back to my 10 favorite people. Hope you're doing well. I'm incredibly excited for today's video because I truly can't believe the backdrop that's setting up for Bitcoin right now. We have the US dollar index collapsing, which is resulting in a rapid increase in global liquidity. And this is the largest weekly drop we've seen in the US dollar index since November of 2022. And that drop back then marked the bottom for Bitcoin's bear market. And these very aggressive drops are very rare for the US dollar index. We've only seen 3 this large in the past 10 years. The most recent one, as we mentioned, was November 2022. That marked Bitcoin's bottom after the FTX capitulation. The one before that was April 2020. That marked Bitcoin's bottom after the C19 crash. And the one before that was August 2015. And that marked Bitcoin's bottom after the capitulation event that we had going into that event. And now this doesn't mean that Bitcoin is going to teleport higher 20% tomorrow, because there is a bit of consolidation and a bit of a lag after each one of these events. We even see that clearly in global liquidity. We can see the very aggressive spike we've seen recently thanks to that drop in the DXY. But you'll notice that the November 2022 bottom for global liquidity, Bitcoin consolidated for about 75 days after that and then took off. Same thing in November of 2023. Global liquidity bottoms, 75 days later, Bitcoin takes off just like we saw previously. And then we had global liquidity bottoming in about the end of June, and roughly 75 days later, Bitcoin takes off, and global liquidity bottomed in early January. So 75 days later puts us at about late to the end of March. So roughly around that time period is when I would expect Bitcoin's next move up. This isn't an exact science, so it could be 74 days, it could be 76, 77. There's nothing special about 75 specifically, but that's about what we've seen on average in terms of the lag before Bitcoin's next rally. And in case that wasn't enough of a bullish backdrop, we're also seeing extremely fearful sentiment, which is resulting in weak hands capitulating and selling from short-term holders. The fear in the sentiment that we're seeing right now is very similar to what we saw in the August bottom and the September 2023 bottom. And you see that very clearly in short-term holder selling. They're capitulating because of all of these concerning narratives and scary price action, just like they did at the August bottom, just like they did at the September bottom, just like they did after the 3AC collapse in the 2022 bear market when we had the local bottom there. Same thing about halfway through 2021 when we had that huge capitulation in the middle of the year that ended up marking our low for that year, and same thing to capitulations that we saw before that event. So usually it's a very good sign when you have extreme fear combined with short-term holder selling, because that's what you end up seeing at these capitulation events. We shake out all of the weak hands until there's no sellers left, and then that's when Bitcoin ends up turning around and working its way back up higher. And finally, we still have Bitcoin trading above its 50-week moving average. This moving average tends to be the line in the sand during Bitcoin bull markets. It's the reason why I think it's unlikely that we will see the low 60s for Bitcoin if this cycle isn't over. And if we still have higher to go, this would be the best risk reward area to add to positions before Bitcoin's next move higher, if we're going to not lose that 50-week moving average. It was very terrifying when we visited it in August during the Japanese yen carry trade stuff. It was terrifying in September of 2023 when we visited it during the SEC suing Coinbase and Binance. And it was also terrifying in 2021 when everything essentially capitulated 50 to 80% in this market, because Elon ended up saying that Bitcoin was bad for the environment. And of course, that coincided with a China ban and long-term holder selling. So there tends to be a lot of very concerning narratives and a lot of reasons to be scared at these lows, combined with scary price action. And that's usually what ends up marking Bitcoin's bottom if this bull market isn't over. So for me, I like to keep things very simple. My invalidation is closing weekly candles below the 50-week moving average. If Bitcoin starts closing candles down here, we can start talking about the cycle being over and how long a potential bear market could take. If Bitcoin slowly grinds its way higher and starts building a new uptrend, we can talk about a normal cycle where perhaps this goes on until the end of the year. But if we see global liquidity start playing into Bitcoin's price action and we see the S&P 500 recover and that sends Bitcoin into a quick blow off top move, then that would confirm my base case that we're going to see a cycle top early this year, and then it's going to be our final blow off top finale before we enter a bear market. And I do believe Bitcoin would already be trading a lot higher if it wasn't for the correction we've been seeing in the S&P 500. These S&P 500 corrections tend to drag Bitcoin down with all of the uncertainty surrounding the tariff drama we've been seeing over the past few weeks, especially now that we have Bitcoin spot ETFs and a lot of people are holding Bitcoin on the same brokerage accounts they hold their stocks, bonds, and other traditional assets. So if there's risk off happening in the S&P 500, I'm not surprised that they are selling their Bitcoin ETFs as well and de-risking their Bitcoin positions. And speaking of de-risking Bitcoin holdings, this week we had a very monumental event. Trump signed an executive order for a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and many people were talking about this being a sell the news event, and this is bearish because they're not going to be going out there and market buying Bitcoin around 100,000. But for months on this channel, we were saying that was very unlikely, and what was most likely was that they wouldn't sell the Bitcoin they already seized. But the real news here is that this essentially de-risks Bitcoin for any large institutions or capital allocators, because that edge case of it being banned in the US or the US all of a sudden becoming anti-Bitcoin has been taken out of the picture. So I think this is incredibly bullish for the long term, and I think other countries will slowly begin to follow. I'm also so happy that we didn't see these altcoins included in the strategic reserve, even though I am a Solana holder, and I'm sure prices would have spiked if they were added to the reserve as well. But I think it's important to differentiate Bitcoin and these other assets. Having these assets added would have been good for prices in the short term, but terrible for US taxpayers and this industry in the longer term, because it really takes away from the seriousness of Bitcoin and the use case it offers. So I'm glad that we didn't see them added to the reserve as well. But I think many investors are ignoring the incredible things we're hearing from Trump and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent talking about bringing BTC onshore and making sure that blockchain technology is adopted in the US. We also saw Bessent say that he wants the US to use stablecoins to ensure the dollar hegemony. And this is something that, people on crypto Twitter used to mull over and think about and talk about for years. And now that this is actually happening, everybody is ignoring it because price isn't going up immediately and the US government isn't buying our bags with taxpayer money. Not to mention, I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing a lot of states following suit now that we have an executive order from the federal government with a Bitcoin strategic reserve. So it should be a lot easier for states like Texas and New Hampshire to follow suit as well. And this is a narrative that can really pick up steam over the next few months. Many people are upset that prices are going down, but that can flip very quickly. And once it does, I think a lot of these more bullish narratives will start to pick up steam and force investors to FOMO back into the market. We just need the S&P 500 to stabilize and for these tariff fears to pass. So I'm optimistic that the future is bright and that Bitcoin has higher to go. We just need to survive March, because we should start seeing things turn around by the end of March at the latest. We'll continue to monitor the price action in the US dollar index to see if we can get some downside continuation after this bounce and get back into the risk on region for the first time since August of 2024. All of these tariff fears and federal layoffs are getting the market to price in more Fed rate cuts, which is another reason why the US dollar index has been going down. So we'll continue to monitor that. We ended up getting a 4.1% unemployment rate print. So it is slowly working its way higher, but we're not seeing any huge spikes. Huge spikes would be terrible for both the people getting laid off and for markets, because it would cause recession panic. But these very slow increases are putting pressure on the Fed to start cutting rates sooner, but they're not causing recession fears and panic to set into the minds of investors. As long as we see inflation continue to cool down and work its way down and no huge spikes in the unemployment rate, I do think that the S&P 500 will recover and put in new highs once again, which will be an incredible backdrop for Bitcoin. As for my portfolio, still no changes since I bought the dip last week, but I have noticed that I stopped getting those very aggressive comments on my cash position and how could I hold any cash in my portfolio, and cash is trash and inflation is turning my cash into a melting ice cube when we were taking profits above 100K. But now that markets have dropped 20 to 30%, 60% for things like Ethereum and Solana, now I don't see those comments anymore, and now people are upset that I'm not selling everything because markets are going to go a lot lower and the cycle top is in. So to be confident at lows, you have to be willing to take some profits at highs, and to take advantage of those lows, you have to be willing to buy dips when people believe the market cycle is over and that prices have a lot lower to go. As for Bitcoin, we're trading near the high end of this fair value region here, and after last week's dip buy, I'm not really interested in adding any more in this area. This expensive region is where I like to slowly take profits. I would love to buy some under 65K if we do end up seeing that in a future bear market, but as of right now, Bitcoin is kind of in no man's land for me, and I think there's a lot more opportunity elsewhere in the market because of these lower values relative to Bitcoin when you look at things like Ethereum. This week, we saw Trump's World Liberty Financial triple their Ethereum holdings, even though the market has been in a downturn. And it's kind of funny because they're essentially red on all of their positions and they're down 70 million on their Ethereum holdings. So if you feel bad on your altcoins being down or your Bitcoin or Ethereum being down, just know that Trump's World Liberty Financial is a bag holder as well. And almost all of their positions are underwater. And sentiment on Ethereum is probably the lowest I have ever seen it since I joined this market in 2017. I see it on the comments of these videos. Whenever I talk about Ethereum, I see it on Twitter. I would say about 90% of people have thrown in the towel that Ethereum is going to do well. I think everybody is convinced that it's dead and it's going to be replaced by a different project. But when we look at on-chain metrics like MVRV and see how close it is to where it historically bottoms during bear markets like 2022, 2018, 2019, and 2020, I really like Ethereum in this area for a long-term hold. I don't know if I'm going to add any more to my positions because I'm already pushing 20%, which is kind of the highest I want to go for Ethereum. But when you look at the steep increase we've seen in whale addresses accumulating compared to the inverse we had seen over the past 2 years or so, I remain optimistic on Ethereum's price if this cycle isn't over, especially when compared to Bitcoin now that we're back at December 2020 lows on ETH/BTC. As for Solana, pretty ugly chart. Investors refuse to stop selling this one, but we are very overdue for a bounce. The lowest I could see it going is sweeping all of this liquidity here at about 120, and then getting a very strong bounce back to maybe above our range mid or even our range high before truly rolling over. If it is in fact done for the cycle, but we're going to have to monitor this price action and see how it progresses. We did see a bit of a bounce on Solana BTC, and maybe it wants to come down to those December 2023 lows before seeing any type of major reversal. But as of right now, just waiting for some relief and for a bounce for Solana. So we'll see what happens. A lot of Solana and Ethereum's price action will rely on Bitcoin. We don't want to see a weekly close below 90K, but that does look inevitable at this point. But we really don't want to see acceptance below that price. We want to see it very quickly reclaimed, like what we saw in June of 2024 when Bitcoin fell below its range and got back above it the next week. The buyback we saw last week was really good going into the close, but we really don't want to see acceptance below 90K. Otherwise, this consolidation could take a lot longer than we currently anticipate. As for traditional markets, we've seen the S&P 500 bounce off its 50-week moving average for the first time since the October 2023 bottom. So at the very least, we would expect to see some relief here before it rolls over if we truly are doomed. But as of right now, that bounce could be an incredible opportunity for Bitcoin to reclaim that range low and maybe start rallying higher. We just need to see what the S&P 500 does next week because it has a huge impact on Bitcoin. And if we do enter an S&P 500 bear market, then I have to expect that Bitcoin is going a lot lower because Bitcoin is further out on the risk curve. But in the longer term, the federal government is still running huge deficits. I know Doge is trying to reduce stuff in the short term, but if we do really start to see some economic weakness, I think those plans are going to be thrown out the window. We are seeing these deficits increase year after year. We'll see what they're able to do, but as of right now, I'm not that optimistic they're going to be fully able to turn this thing around that quickly. And if we continue to see an increase in the national debt, it eventually results in an increase in the money supply, which is bullish for risk assets like the S&P 500 and bullish for risk assets like Bitcoin. So we'll see what happens. Let me know what outcome you think is most likely. An early cycle top around May, June is my base case based on what we're seeing with sentiment and global liquidity, but I'm open to the cycle going on longer if we start seeing the data point towards that. But as of right now, I have a hard time believing the cycle is over, but I'm willing to change my mind if we lose the 50-week moving average. As always, let me know what you expect. Thank you so much for the support on the recent videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.